There is a special kind of silence that exists only in morgues. It is not the silence of a library, filled with the soft whisper of turning pages. And it is not the silence of an empty house, where floorboards creak at night. This silence is absolute, artificial, unnatural. A ringing emptiness where time itself seemed frozen. A thick, cold stillness, broken only by the steady hum of refrigeration units. I chose this silence as my profession. My name is Ethan. I am an intern in the pathology department. Death was never a tragedy to me. It was a fact, a logical ending that every complex system eventually reaches. The human body is an astonishing machine. And here, in this cold kingdom of tile and steel, I studied the reasons why those machines fail. My work demanded detachment, a clear mind, a steady hand, and I took pride in possessing all three. I left my emotions outside the heavy, iron-reinforced door. A permanent part of that silence was Mr. Petrov, the night orderly, an old man who seemed to be made from the same substance as the morgue itself, dust, formaldehyde, and quiet. He was impossibly old. He moved without sound, like a shadow, and he almost never spoke. He was not a person. He was a function, transport, clean, cover. He was as essential to the morgue as the autopsy table or the steel drawers in the wall. I never saw him eat. I never saw him drink coffee. He simply existed, blending into the hum of the freezers and the smell of disinfectant. It all began with numbers. I am a meticulous person. One of my duties was maintaining the intake log, time of arrival, presumed cause of death, and of course, the body's weight. And that's when I noticed an anomaly, barely noticeable, within the margin of error. In the mornings, when I came on shift and prepared the bodies for autopsy, I performed a second weighing, and the bodies that had spent the night in the morgue were almost always lighter. Not by much, 50 grams, 100, sometimes 200. I explained it away. Dehydration, faulty old scales, moisture evaporation. Any rational person could find a dozen explanations. But the anomaly was disturbingly consistent. It occurred in every body that spent the night under Mr. Petrov's silent watch. Then I noticed something else. Physical changes. Microscopic. Almost imperceptible. I remembered a large, ugly mole on the cheek of a drowning victim. In the morning, before the autopsy, the mole was still there. But it looked flatter, faded. I blamed the cold and post-mortem changes. Another body, an elderly man with cirrhosis, had a bright tattoo on his arm. By morning, the lines seemed blurred, less defined. I told no one. Try telling someone that bodies lose weight overnight and tattoos fade. They would have sent me for a psychiatric evaluation. I convinced myself it was stress, an overactive imagination fed by the nature of my work. But I began to watch Mr. Petrov. He did everything as he always had. Mopped the floors, wiped the tables, moved bodies on a gurney. His face, round and wrinkled like a baked potato, showed no expression. His eyes, deep set, almost colorless, looked nowhere. But there was something strange in his movements. When he touched the dead, he did it with an unusual, almost tender care. Not like objects, but like a gourmet inspecting produce at a market. One night, I had to stay late. A complicated case. Histology samples needed immediately. I worked in my small lab adjacent to the main hall. Mr. Petrov was on duty. He glided silently across the tiled floor. That was when I decided to perform a small, cruel experiment. I entered the main hall. On a gurney, under a sheet, lay a young woman, a car accident victim. I approached her. "Mr. Petrov, could you help me for a moment?" "I need to turn her over," I said, keeping my voice steady. He drifted toward me. We turned the body, and while his attention was elsewhere, pretending to examine injuries, I discreetly used the tip of a sterile forceps to leave a tiny scratch on her forearm, less than a millimeter, impossible to notice unless you knew where to look. "Thank you, Mr. Petrov. I'll take it from here." He nodded silently and drifted away. I pretended to finish my work, said goodbye, and left. But I didn't go home. I circled the building and climbed through the window of an abandoned locker room that overlooked the main hall. It was dark. It smelled of mothballs. Through the dusty glass, like looking through murky water, I could see the hall lit by a single dim lamp. I hid and waited. An hour. 2. Nothing happened. Mr. Petrov sat in his chair motionless, like a statue. I began to think my paranoia had finally won. Then he stood up. He moved silently as always, walked to the gurney, pulled back the sheet. But he didn't look at her face or her injuries. He stared at her arm, at the exact spot where I had made the scratch. For several seconds, he simply examined it, his head tilted, and then, what happened next is something my mind still refuses to accept. It wasn't like in horror movies. He didn't bite the flesh. He leaned over her arm, and from his mouth, slowly, like something from the deep ocean, emerged something thin, pale, almost translucent, like a tongue or a tentacle. It gently lowered itself onto the woman's skin. There was no blood, no sound. The tendril touched the scratch and went still. I thought I could see it vibrating, as if drawing out something invisible. It worked with a surgeon's precision. After a minute, it detached and slowly withdrew back into Mr. Petrov's mouth. He covered the body with the sheet. Trembling, I pressed myself against the glass. He had done something to the scratch, consumed it, erased it. Mr. Petrov slowly turned around and looked directly at me, directly at the dark window where I was hiding. 20 meters apart, dim light, dusty glass. But I saw his eyes. They were no longer empty. There was depth in them, ancient, inhuman intelligence, and calm, cold understanding. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked, and his gaze said everything. "I know you're here. I know what you saw. And now you know what I am." I don't remember how I got out of there. The next day passed in a haze. I ignored my phone. I wanted to run, quit, forget everything. But by evening, I understood one simple truth. I couldn't. What if I leave? Another intern will come, less observant, and without my watchful eye, Mr. Petrov will stop being careful. His appetite will grow. Who will stop him? The police? "Hello, officer. Our night orderly eats the dead with a tongue-like appendage." They would lock me up for the rest of my life. I realized I was the only one who knew, and the only one who could influence it at all. The next day, I came to work. Pale, dark circles under my eyes. But I came. Mr. Petrov was there, gliding silently through the halls. He gave no sign that anything had happened. Neither did I. We didn't say a word, but everything had changed. A quiet Cold War had begun between us. I couldn't stop him, but I could watch. Every morning now, I did more than weigh the bodies. I examined them closely. I photographed identifying marks. I kept notes in my private journal. And he knew. He felt my eyes on him every time he approached a new arrival. This is my ending. It isn't like the others. There is no victory, no defeat, no battle, no escape. Only an endless, cold truce within the walls of the morgue. I am not a hero. I am a watchman, a night sentinel. My task is not to defeat the monster, but to restrain it with constant, unblinking observation, to keep it cautious, to keep it from losing control. I sacrifice my peace, my future, my sanity for this strange, terrifying duty. I am the only audience in his theatre, and as long as I am watching, he must continue playing the role of a harmless old orderly. And every night, as I walk into work, I ask myself the same question. How long will my presence be enough to hold back his hunger?